Imagine that you go to hospital or to a clinic for some routine medical treatment, and instead of walking away perfectly well and happy, you actually walk away with a life-threatening condition. That's what happened to Richard Warwick from North Yorkshire. He's visiting the House of Commons this week as a debate takes place on the so-called contaminated blood disaster, where over 5,000 people developed viruses after receiving infected blood transfusions. 2,500 of those 5,000 people died as a result of receiving those blood transfusions. Richard joins me now from our studio in Malton. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Jonathan.
Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme today. Why did you need to get involved with the medical profession and blood in the first place?
Basically, I have haemophilia, which is an hereditary bleeding disorder where your blood doesn't clot normally, whereas you would get, if you knocked yourself, you get a lump and a bruise, which will go down after a few days. That doesn't happen with someone with haemophilia. It just continues bleeding internally. That can be into joints and muscles, and obviously from cuts. So you have to have replacement factor A, which is the missing protein in the blood, to actually stop the blood from, to actually stop the bleeding. Right.
This was the disease that was perhaps most famous of all in the Russian royal family, wasn't it?
That's right. Yes.
How did that have an impact on your life? I mean, it's an hereditary disease. You've had it all your life. What was life like? What was life like for you as a kid?
Well, I was obviously born with haemophilia, but I wasn't diagnosed until the age of about 3. And, of course, you can imagine the hell that my parents went through up until that time, with a toddler running about, falling over, falling downstairs, covered in bruises and lumps, and the doctors just didn't know what was wrong. I spent a great deal of time in pain, and it wasn't until I actually went through to Hull on my 3rd birthday that they said to Scarborough Hospital, "What have you been doing all these years? This little lad has haemophilia." And they couldn't believe it. I was put in plaster casts. I was put in traction, and all the doctors at the time thought thought these lumps were due to infections. It was quite horrendous.
It's a bit of a miracle, really, that you made it through at all, because, they diagnose haemophilia very early these days, and children who are haemophiliacs have to have a special drug regime, and those first few, as you say, those first few rough and tumble years of life, they can be quite difficult.
Yes, they can. I was lucky in so much as that I went to a disabled children's college in Hampshire, where I met a lot of other kids with haemophilia, and unfortunately, out of the 60 or so people with haemophilia at the time, only about 5 have survived to this day. So all the other 45 have just died through being infected with hepatitis C and HIV through their treatment.
Well, tell me about the treatment, because haemophilia is the starting point for this. You need this special factor 8.
Yes, basically there's 13 proteins that go up to complete the clotting process, and if one's missing, think of it as a link in a chain. If that link's missing, then the clotting process can't complete. So I've got factor 8 missing. All haemophiliacs have factor 8 missing, and if you replace that factor, then the blood can clot normally. The main problem is that the factor A that was available was what's called cryoprecipitate. It was derived from 3 or 4 donors, and in the late 1970s, early 1980s, a new product was imported from America called concentrated factor 8. And
was this good news? Was this good news initially?
It was initially, because it wasn't as cumbersome as the old cryoprecipitate, which came in bags and it took ages to infuse. But the problem was it came from prisoners, Skid Row donors, prostitutes, drug addicts in America. And of course the big pharmaceutical companies in America wanted to make as much money as possible from their blood products. I mean, some of it even came from cadavers that they were buying in for next to nothing and shipping out across Europe and Asia. The American FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in America themselves, they wouldn't touch it.
So we were buying in a blood product to this country from America that the Americans would not approve for use on Americans.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the bottom line. The National Health Service. I mean, David Owen. Not so much David Owen, but Kenneth Clark knew full well of the risks to haemophilia patients by using this contaminated blood.
I'm sure he would deny that vehemently were he here.
Oh, I'm sure he would. But what you have to remember is that these plasma programs, as they were known in America, were actually run by prisoners. And, for instance, the one that was in Arkansas, the inmates were walking around jaundiced, yellow with hepatitis, and swapping the personal details and forging documents so that they could sell their own blood to buy drugs in the prisons.
When did you realise? So, how old were you then by the time we got to the late 70s, early 80s, when this concentrate started to be used?
Oh, crikey, it'd be probably 1975 when I first started to receive this factor 8 concentrate.
So how old were you then?
About 13.
Right. Okay. So you're a little lad.
Little lad, yeah.
Yeah. When did anybody realise that something might not be all as it should be?
Well, I mean, the risks were known about going back as far as 1974. There were various viruses which they couldn't actually test for, but they knew were present in the blood. And I wasn't actually told until 1988 that I was HIV positive. So there was a big gap between, between actually being infected by these blood products, contaminated blood products, and being told. So all that time I was injecting myself with the same viruses again and again and again. The incredible thing is that these blood products, when blood was taken from prisoners, it was spun, turned into plasma, and up to 20,000 units or 20,000 pints of blood were put into effectively a big pot, a vat, mixed with all of the donations, and it only took one single contaminated donation to infect the whole batch of 20,000 units. That was then shipped to the processing plants in America and other countries. It wasn't just the United States that were involved in this, and at that point it was broken down and freeze-dried and put into bottles and shipped abroad.
To you and others?
To me and others, yes.
Is it just HIV that is in your system as a result of this, or are there other things?
I've got hepatitis C and HIV. And I've haemophilia, and I've also got epilepsy thrown in for good measure, but that's obviously nothing to do with the haemophilia.
What about the hepatitis C? What does that mean?
Hepatitis C, it's a viral infection that basically destroys your liver. It's a horrible disease. You've probably heard of hepatitis A and B, which are less virile versions of hepatitis. But hepatitis C particularly destroys your internal organs, liver and heart. I take a huge amount of pills and medication daily, and the side effects of hepatitis C on its own are constant tiredness, depression, nausea, lack of appetite, and then of course the HIV as well, which destroys your immune system. I count myself lucky by comparison to some of the people I know and met over the years, in that I haven't had to have multiple liver transplants, haven't had cancer, haven't had joint replacements. I've had a knee replacement, well, that's not really a joint replacement. And add to this the stress and of the secrecy involved because of the stigma. Well, it's not so bad now, but the stigma 20 years ago was dreadful. Anybody that was that came into contact with HIV or HTLV3, as it was known there, was branded as AIDS scum and all the horrible things. But of course, I'm just a patient of the NHS, and I was given these infected blood products. I didn't have a choice. And I've been effectively condemned to death and a very short life as I sit here now.
We'll be back with you in a moment, Richard. Thank you very much indeed for telling your story so far. Back with Richard Warwick in just a second or two's time. If what he's talking about rings bells with you, maybe you're in a similar situation, maybe you've got family members who've been affected by the so-called contaminated blood disaster of which Richard has been a victim, then for goodness sake, pick up the phone and call.